Americans have steel in their spines, grit in their souls, and fire in their hearts.
Hi, this is Seema Mehta from the Los Angeles Times, and we saw night 4 of the Republican National Convention tonight, where President Trump accepted his party's nomination to run for re-election. That part was not a surprise. What was interesting, though, is that for both the RNC and the DNC, they've been so greatly impacted by coronavirus, by COVID. They couldn't have the huge gatherings they normally have, and so tonight was really the first time we saw anything that resembled what a traditional convention might kind of look like. And this is what President Trump was craving. He had a crowd of between 1,500 and 2,000 people on the White House lawn. He had fireworks at the Washington Monument. But that said, it also led to some sort of startling imagery. The people who gathered at the White House, well, first of all, the fact that it was at the White House raised a lot of eyebrows, because traditionally you don't use the White House for partisan efforts. It's the American people's house. You use it for government, speeches and press conferences and announcements of action, but you don't use it for partisan messaging. And so that was unusual. And that also set off a lot of alarm bells, who have been saying that throughout the convention that the president his campaign has repeatedly violated the Hatch Act, for example, with Melania Trump speaking from the Rose Garden, or from including a naturalization ceremony and a pardoning from the White House the other night. So this isn't the first time, but this was the most perhaps egregious example. The other reason it was sort of shocking to see, between 1,500 and 2,000 people gathered on the lawn of the White House was because we're still in the midst of the coronavirus crisis, and there was no social distancing. Very few people were wearing masks. So at a time when the virus is still, rampaging across the country, in Iowa, they just shut down bars and nightclubs in 6 counties. In California, we're still not fully reopened. We haven't seen a scene with that many people gathering in public with sort of government sanction. And so I think especially for elected officials who are trying to make, deliver the message that it's still not safe to do this kind of thing. Tonight, the imagery, it was sort of in sharp contrast to what's happening. And as one of my colleagues, Chris McGarrian, pointed out, the number of seats that were there basically represent the number of people who have died during the 4 days of the Republican National Convention from COVID. That was a jarring thing, because throughout this convention, most speakers have really taken pains to present Trump, the president, as a leader through this crisis, as pointing to the work he did to transform military ships into mobile hospitals, to get ventilators and PPE to frontline workers, but a lot of it has glossed over sort of the pain that a lot of Americans have felt. There's like 180,000 Americans dead, and the number is climbing. People's way of life has been completely disrupted. Kids aren't going back to school, employees are not going back to the workplace, and it's almost painted it as a challenge that we've overcome, yet most of the country is still really reeling in the midst of this. That was a picture that you would have seen 6 months ago or a year ago, but it's not a picture anyone has seen in the last 5 months since this crisis hit.
The United States will be the first nation to plant its beautiful flag on Mars.
The president's message was pretty long. It was about 70 minutes, which I think it was relatively close to the message he gave during the 2016 RNC when he accepted the nomination. And some of the themes were familiar. He was talking to workers in places like Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, who felt like their livelihoods had been affected by Democratic policy like NAFTA, that their jobs had gone away, that that leaders in Washington didn't care about them.
We laid off workers in Michigan, Ohio, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, and many other states. They didn't want to hear Biden's hollow words of empathy. They wanted their jobs back.
He spoke about the judges, his appointment of conservative judges and justices, which speaks to the conservative voters who, some of whom were skeptical of him or his character, but were really behind the idea of voting for him because they believe that if you get a new generation of judges, that'll impact policy in this nation for a generation to come.
By the end of my first term, we will have approved more than 300 federal judges, including 2 great new Supreme Court justices.
The president continued to portray the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, and his running mate, Kamala Harris, as it was sort of interesting. He portrayed them 2 ways. One, he basically said that if they're elected, and he is not alone in this, the president and so many speakers throughout the past 4 days have said that if Joe Biden is elected, basically you're not going to be safe. There will be mobs running rampant through the American cities, that the economy will crumble, that life as we know it will completely go away.
If the left gains power, they will demolish the suburbs, confiscate your guns, and appoint justices who will wipe away your Second Amendment and other constitutional freedoms.
But then they also make this other argument, which is interesting, and it's a little bit contradictory, which is that Biden is somehow a Trojan horse
Biden is a Trojan horse for socialism.
for the most liberal elements of the Democratic Party, that if Biden gets elected, the AOCs and the Bernie Sanders of the world will really be in control. And I think that this points to the idea that it's kind of hard to paint Joe Biden as, you know, this crazy-eyed liberal when most Americans have seen him for the past almost 50 years. And, you know, whatever you think of him, I don't think you think of him in the same breath you think of Bernie Sanders or some of the more liberal, most liberal elements of the Democratic Party. But that was the messaging we've seen throughout the week. Another another topic we saw revisited again and again was the issue of law enforcement and the idea that Democrats have abandoned law enforcement and are deciding to side with mobs.
When asked if he supports cutting police funding, Joe Biden replied, yes, absolutely.
When you listen to the Democrats speak about this, it's law enforcement is good, but we have to focus, we have to do something about the small segment of law enforcement that is not good and that has, that's terrorized minority and underserved communities. But there was very little of that sort of nuance at the Republican National Convention. It was very much that if Joe Biden is elected, you will not be safe. And I think that's also part of the play for suburban voters. We've seen this in the Trump campaign's ads and in the messaging, for the past couple months, which is, I think, really aimed at suburban women voters, arguing that if Joe Biden is elected, your suburb, your neighborhood, your block is not going to be safe. Your kids aren't going to be safe. So this is something that we're definitely going to see a lot of between now and November.
Dad, people attack you for being unconventional, but I love you for being real.
The president was introduced by Ivanka Trump, his daughter, who's also one of his top advisors. And she tried to humanize him in a way that I think, only perhaps a daughter can, talking about her experiences, as he makes decisions, as they walk from the White House, from the offices to the residence. And also talking about how, and this is a theme we've seen, but I think it was most effective from her, basically saying, he's a little bit unfiltered on Twitter. You might not like the way he says things, but he's got your back.
I recognize that my dad's communication style is not to everyone's taste.
She also spoke about COVID, and she was one of the few speakers, Melania did it last night, Ivanka did it tonight, and then the president did it a little bit tonight, where they spoke about the number of people, or they spoke about the fact that people are dying from COVID.
For those who are battling COVID-19 and for the first responders and the healthcare heroes who remain on the front line of this fight, the grief, sorrow, and anxiety during this time is felt by all.
That was a message that I don't feel we've heard a ton of during this convention. I feel like she was, in a way, trying to humanize the president, to show a softer side of him. But it was a little bit of rewriting history, because she talked about how the president, despite these, amazing growth in the economy, he shut it down because he was so worried about COVID.
I watched him take the strongest, most inclusive economy in a lifetime, the lowest unemployment in a half century, and the highest wage increase for working families in decades, and close it down to save American lives.
But he didn't shut it down. States, governors shut it down, and local officials shut it down, or they didn't. And then we've seen varying COVID infection rates, across the country based on what's happened. I mean, we see this in California. We got shut down really quickly. Things got calm. And then we reopened too quickly, and then the rate started to rise again, which is why we've had to shut down again. So the president was super reluctant to have the economy shut down. He pressured state and local officials to reopen the economy. So for Ivanka to be talking about how he, despite these great gains in the economy, he knew he had to shut down the economy because for American interests, it just rang a little hollow, because that's not what happened. And with that, we have a little over 2 months left before Election Day. Please keep tuning in to LAtimes.com for our election coverage.